Welcome to our Zession. If you're new here, my name is Mandy Rourke, and
I'm Sapna Srivastav, and we're co-founders of Zesho. And Zessions are the conversations that we have amongst clinicians. We talk about topics typically addressed in the mental health world with the perspective of clinicians who support clients daily.
yeah, and we have a very special guest today, Bri Craig from, it's been a couple years now after we met you, and you were one of our first partners with Zesho, came on, and ever since we met you, we've been just so happy to have this connection with you and to collaborate, which is what we're talking about today too, collaborative therapy. I think our souls kind of speak to each other with this lens, and very easy to geek out about this topic. So feel free to introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm really happy to be here. Definitely a little nervous, but feeling good about it. My name is Bri. I do like to just kind of share a little bit about myself. I guess as we get going, I would say that I am a queer, non-binary therapist, using they, them pronouns. I have been living and working in Austin, Texas, I think now since 2019, which feels like a long time. The pandemic, I feel like, made all of that go by a lot faster. But opened my practice in 2020, so have been working, kind of managing my business since then. Typically find myself working with a lot of different people, but my passion areas are definitely working with Black, Indigenous people of color, queer folks, kind of anybody who has intersections of those identities. And then also kind of in recent years, neurodivergence is an area that I find myself working with a lot as well. Individuals, couples, families, individuals and couples right now, though, is also kind of where I'm focusing the most. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Totally.
Mm-hmm. We were talking about this ahead of time, that we're all very relationally driven in our work. And so that's going to be a big part of kind of our conversation today, too. So trying to think of how do we even start this conversation? It feels like so many layers to it.
Yeah, very much so. Well, so our main topic is just kind of shooting the shit a little bit about collaborative therapy. And so maybe we can start there. How would we define collaborative therapy? What makes up the biggest components of collaborative therapy?
Totally.
For each of us.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, like Mandy said, like the relationship is where I'm putting the most focus. So I think being able to really create a sense of mutual trust between client and therapist feels important to me as far as when I'm thinking about what it means to be collaborative. So making sure that we are co-creating a space together where both of us are kind of on this journey together, if you will. Like there's this dance between who leads, who follows. And I think that trust and safety to me are those driving forces, I guess. So I think that's what sticks out to me, at least how I'm thinking when I'm operating in this way. Yeah.
Well, I think within collaborative, maybe it'd be helpful to break down, I don't know, I think some people may see it as like, is that an approach to therapy, or is that like some sort of technique that you're using? So how would you kind of break down what collaborative therapy is?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's more of a way of being rather than doing. So kind of a lens or perspective that you're taking versus having these, I don't know, different interventions that you're bringing in and using with clients. So one of the really important facets, I think, of collaborative therapy is the therapist kind of adopting this not knowing stance, this idea that, we're putting aside our own judgment. We are coming in really curious and kind of humble and kind of using like this sense of humility in that we don't really know exactly what this person has been through. We're trusting that they're the expert of their own lives, you know, and we're the expert of the process, but that they are ultimately kind of knowing where they need to go, and our job is to kind of help them along the way. So I think for me, that's another thing that stands out just about practicing in this way, is that it's less about what you're doing and more about how you are like just showing up in the room and how you're present with the client.
Yeah. I love this conversation around this particular approach to therapy too, because I feel like, and this might be making assumptions, which of course is not the most collaborative, but I do feel like there tends to be kind of a stereotype around therapy too, of it's like this, what we call as therapists hierarchical, of like this power dynamic between the therapist who's kind of, you know, up here, and if you're listening, my hand is high, and like the clinician, the client down here, and my hand is low, and just kind of imbalanced. And it's a very stereotypical, like what you tend to see in media and everything too. And this is a very different approach, and an approach that a lot of, you know, we are marriage and family therapists. And so I think a lot of the marriage and family therapists that I know tend to use this collaborative approach in at least some way, shape, or form, if not like full on. And so I love that we can help paint this picture a little bit more of this is also an approach, and this is an approach that a lot of us use, and this is what therapy can look like for those who are less familiar or don't realize that this is an option for you know, clinicians that you're hoping to work with. And so I love the not knowing. Even knowing that I maybe did not use that just now, naming that. And so what because I know if we're going to go extra nerdy, like we know that collaborative is, again, as a clinician's call, kind of like postmodern. And we say that for the benefit of the clinicians, but if we break that down for those who have no idea what that means, even some of us clinicians out there might not be as clear on what that means. What would we say is like kind of like the theoretical basis behind collaborative as an approach?
I mean, I think for one, that knowledge is fluid, and is also kind of influenced by how we are in our relationships with others. So I think collaborative therapy would suggest that through having meaningful dialogue with our therapist, that we're able to generate new meanings in our own life, and we're able to see maybe how we want to make these changes, you know, in our life. I would also say that, again, kind of talking about postmodernism, there is this understanding that there really is no universal truth. And therefore that means that multiple realities can exist at once. And that really also seeks to kind of help, like what you're describing, of the therapist and the client being less in this kind of hierarchical, like power dynamic, and being kind of seen as more equal. So the client's perspective is really kind of prioritized, and we're really giving power to the client to feel like their perspectives are just as important as the therapist. Sometimes, if not even maybe more important. And I think like one of the ways that I feel like this way of being has helped me is hoping to suspend my own maybe agenda coming into therapy, and trusting that, again, clients know where they need to go. I'm helping them along that, but like I'm not needing to push that onto them, because I know that their perspective is also valid. So I guess those are a few things that stand out to me just with postmodernism, kind of how that plays into collaborative therapy.
And I think as we were kind of preparing for this too, it was interesting to think about like how much do we talk about modernism versus postmodernism, and even just reflecting on like having to write the papers. Back in the day, I was like, this is so confusing, but then also at the same time, it felt really freeing after I started learning more, because I do think that even, you know, in our training, in our graduate school programs. There's a lot of emphasis on this modality or this technique, or and more of a lot of that, systemically speaking, is like more modern based stuff, which I think can be helpful to consider.
Sure.
But I think where it gets a little dicey or potentially harmful is when the therapist attaches to that and says, okay, this is what is happening. And so I guess this kind of ties back into the not knowing of like how we show up and how we also, and maybe I'm opening up the conversation now around how this looks in therapy too. Because I think as we talk about it, I think a lot of people come in and they have maybe that assumption that the therapist is going to be the expert. And I've had clients say, like, what are we going to be talking about today?
Yeah.
I'm like, what would you like to talk about today? And it's almost like sometimes startling, like, aren't you supposed to be the one that like leads? And I'm like, I'm here. If that's the feedback you're giving me, I'm here to help. But also with all that being said, how do you kind of see it translate into the actual space, like the style or like what it would feel like to be in that more postmodern approach?
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, kind of like what I was saying earlier, the safety that we're building in the session to me is like one of the most important like guiding factors for me. So, disclosing honestly, like when I am struggling or when a client does ask me like, how are you, like being able to like allow myself to be human with the client. I think that's like one way. I would also say, like attending to how I am able to help clients feel like they have agency in sessions. So checking in with them, periodically to make sure that they feel like they are getting what they need. If they're not, being able to, again, collaboratively kind of discuss what are you needing more of? How can we create that together in session? Those are a few ways. I think another one would probably be, I just lost my train of thought.
It's okay.
Okay, wait.
That's part of it though, right?
Yeah, I was like, ooh.
Actually, on that note, really fast.
Yeah.
I do lose my train of thought in therapy a lot as the client. And I used to really get nervous of like, oh God, I'm supposed to know like I'm supposed to be seamless in this. And there is so much freedom in being like, I lost it. Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah,
it might be a little bit more. I'm nervous. I'm starting to shake. And that to me is actually really in line with like, this is the self coming out. Like we're human in this and I'm not any better than you. I'm not going to be like performing over here.
Yeah. No, I think that actually does lead me to another point that I was going to share, which is, bringing our full selves into session and I don't know, not feeling like I need to censor myself and also allowing clients to feel like all of their parts are welcome as well. Like having those human moments, right? And I think to me, that is the heart of this work is like the human connection that you are able to have and that kind of allowing the clients to do the work that they're wanting to do. I appreciate you bringing that up for just reminding me that is also part of this. Yeah,
absolutely. My mind's still kind of stuck on kind of going back to what you were starting to say before, Mandy, of like having clients who come into therapy expecting that model of therapy where the therapist is the expert and like, you're going to tell me what to do and you're going to tell me how to fix my life and like, give me all the solutions. And so kind of my approach in that from a collaborative perspective tends to be like, I'm going to do my best to meet you at least halfway of like, it sounds like you feel like you're needing a lot more guidance and feeling like you're needing some kind of stability here, more, interventions or solutions. And I'm happy to try and meet you halfway there. But it can be really challenging too of like, especially when, I've enjoyed really challenging myself, both like in my master's program and like as I've grown as a clinician in taking that not making assumptions stance and really coming from a place of curiosity. And of course it's a process and it's not perfected. But I realize that it can also be challenging for me and myself as a therapist in being authentic in that space to really meet that need as maybe fully as the client is hoping for, when that the collaborative approach is ideally what I'd like to take.
Yeah.
And they're hoping for more of an expert.
Yeah. I think this is definitely something that I've struggled with a lot. I think, yeah, I would prefer to work with clients who do obviously align with this approach and feel like it speaks to them, or at least that it's something that they can, I don't know, relate to in some way. But I definitely feel like I've had experiences with clients where there is this expectation and really almost even like, I don't know, demanding that I am in that role, or that I am taking kind of that expert stance. And I don't know, I think there are obviously moments where I can, like you said, meet them where they're at and try to provide more of that. But I also am just pretty honest that if that is the type of therapist, if that is the type of therapy that they are wanting, that they may not find that with me, and that's okay. And I think being able to also provide resources for them to look elsewhere is a part of being collaborative and relationship like focused anyways too, is like making sure that they are still getting the support they need until they make that transition, right? So yeah, I definitely relate though to what you're saying, and I think it's been interesting just for me to navigate that space with myself, because I do know that I am an expert in some ways.
Sure.
But making sure that that's not what's leading me in all of the sessions and all of my work sometimes I think feels challenging to kind of separate that too.
Yeah.
Well, I think within that, what just popped into my head was like a other focus versus the self focus. Like we have ourself as the therapist, yes, but the attention is not on ourself. It is, I mean, sometimes,
Sure.
but more of it is on this relationship, as you were saying before, and like creating this trust, creating this safe environment, but then also focusing on their expertise. And to me, that is really leaning into their strengths and helping where, you know, I can think of many times before where maybe it felt really collaborative. And then it got to a point where, I mean, I can think about an athlete that I worked with that was like, I need you to be a coach right now. And so we tried a little bit, and then it got to the point where I was like, I think you want more of like a coach as a therapist versus someone who, as you were describing earlier, we were having conversations that create new meaning versus you're coming into me and I'm going to tell you like, this is the game plan. Now just follow it. Like it's a recipe for success. I'm more so. And I think we probably are all a little similar in this respect of how can you tell me what you feel that game plan would be, and you self-discover that on your own just by way of how we're talking about it.
Sure. Yeah.
Because that's the art of our expertise around the power of that conversation, right? How do we as clinicians create the conversation so that they lead to their own new meaning or shared new meaning?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I think it can be scary, right, to be in that position where maybe you haven't even thought about that, right? Like you haven't even thought that, oh, I can go inwards and I can talk about these things in this space that feels comfortable, where my therapist is kind of with me but not telling me, and like that I now have this agency to find these answers within me. Like I think if that is not something that, I don't know, even feels like it has been possible for a lot of folks, which I guess kind of leads me to thinking through in my own experience the types of clients that have benefited the most from this way of working. Definitely folks who do like hold marginalized identities, you know? I mean, talking a little bit, maybe throwing a little bit of shade just at like Western psychology and mental health, where there have largely been a lot of folks who have been kind of left out, or at least like have kind of been seen as like not human, right? So I think like those folks who maybe have had negative experiences or haven't felt like they've seen themselves in previous therapists, or even have felt like, oh, like someone can just be with me and witness my story and witness my pain and not tell me like you're defective or there's something wrong with you or you're pathological or whatever. Like, I think that has been really powerful for me, and just being able to lean into like that relationship that am building, and that sense of trust that I'm building with the client, in knowing that their reality is valid, and I'm not coming in to tell them what they need to do to fix it. It's like, let's just be with this in the space. So I think that's, I don't know. I just think that was something that kind of came up for me as I was hearing you talk about it. Yeah.
I love that because, I'm passionate about working with similar populations as well. And I do think that I love this approach because of that. I think you've used the words like safer container, to process through things that are really difficult in ways that hopefully de-emphasize kind of the majority narrative that tends to run deep, that does not represent everyone. And so I do appreciate you naming that too. And I do kind of, again, this might be my own topic that keeps circulating in my brain, but we're being authentic. I'm going to name it. Of going back to those clients who do want that expert role of like what you were saying before, if it can be really scary to like start to open yourself up to like, I need to come up with the answers myself. And like, it can be really scary to trust yourself too. And especially for, underrepresented communities and people within those communities who've been told for so long, like, you can't trust yourself. You aren't worth trusting, and similar narratives in that way. Like, it makes a lot of sense why so many people come into therapy kind of plopping that on the floor and be like, help me fix it. Tell me what to do.
Yeah.
It can be really scary to feel like you're allowed to start trusting yourself again.
Totally.
Yeah. I appreciate you naming that.
Well, I think scary, but also unfamiliar, right?
Yeah.
And I think that kind of brings up a point that feels really important with collaborative therapy, because I guess the official name is collaborative language systems, which, as you were describing kind of this before, the words and the way that we discuss things creates meaning. And even within that, of having someone describe their emotional experience, and not, if someone says this is scary or I feel really depressed, that's not just, oh, okay, you feel scared or you feel depressed in the way that I understand those words to mean. It's also, it's not really like a tell me more about that. It's like, what do you experience when you're experiencing this fear? Tell me what that experience is like. And I think that that's part of our work in this collaborative space of, it's how am I trying to say this? Like, you're in the here and now, helping them develop a sense of safety and trust with themselves by way of even having them clarify what these words and experiences mean for them, versus just being like, oh, okay, check. You've told me that symptom. Now we're going to jump to this intervention. It's like, well, let's really understand what that means for you. So it's continuously like putting it back into the hands of the client to cultivate that safety from the start.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. I think also, just to kind of go off of that, I mean, language shapes our reality, right? And so I think being able to clarify, or at least, again, continuing to help the client clarify what it means when they are sharing their experiences, or at least to be helping them be curious, or even more curious about, when I say I am feeling this, or when I am sharing this aspect of my story, like, how does it feel? Like, what does this mean to you, rather than what are you expecting from me to respond to whatever it is that you are sharing? Like, what does it mean to you? Because ultimately that is what matters the most. And kind of, this thread of how can I help empower the client to trust themselves enough to feel like I do have those answers, and those are things that I can access, within myself. And I don't need to like look to this person that I perceive to be in power to make sense of that for me, Yeah.
Within that, just really fast, it makes me think about, I guess it kind of ties in with the feedback a little bit of like, tell me how you're feeling in these sessions.
Yeah.
But then also, like a lot of times I'll find myself, if I am curious about something that I don't know anything about, rather than saying, I think this is what's happening, I might more so present it as like, this is something I'm curious about or I'm wondering about. Tell me what you think about that, or tell me where I have it completely wrong.
Totally.
And there's something, maybe this is like a little geeky as the therapist, but I love when clients will respond like, no, it's not that.
Yeah.
I'm like, great.
Yeah.
What is it? Tell me what it is, because I think, full transparency, when I was a newer therapist, that felt really threatening. It felt very scary to say, after 4 or 5 sessions of maybe my 4th client I've ever had, like, how's therapy going? I'm like, I hope it's going well. I hope I'm really helpful. To now fast forward like 10 years later, where you're like, I want you to tell me, what you need more of. I want you to tell me when I'm not getting it, because that helps me empower you even that much more. Because it's at the end of the day, that's where it has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
And that's the work of myself, to be able to be in that place of like kind of freedom to like allow that to happen.
Yeah, I agree. I also just think this idea that we need to be helpful, right? Like as the therapist, I think probably it comes from more of these modern ways that I think we were probably all taught at least some point that like that is, we do need to be helpful to our clients, and there's a very specific way that we should be helping, right? And I think, it's just interesting. I think I agree, when I was first starting out, that was the driving force probably behind me just checking in with them to begin with, that it was more self-focused and less about, do you really feel like you are getting what you need, right? But I think one way that I invite clients to do that is I'll share, there's this thing that's coming up for me, and I'm just naming, this is what's coming up for me, and let me just bring this into the space and see what you think about it. And does it fit for you? Does it not? If it doesn't, like, let's talk through how you're making meaning of it in a different way, right? So I think also, to me, one of the most important pieces about being collaborative is kind of making my internal process or my internal thoughts known to the client, so it's all kind of out on the table, and that I'm not holding these things back or making these assumptions about what I'm seeing, that I'm actually bringing that into the space so that we can talk about it together, to see what fits and what doesn't, right? So I think that definitely comes up for me as well, just in how I work.
I like it.
Yeah, I do too. I appreciate that as well, because I think there can be sometimes when we're learning about like what collaborative language looks like in implementing it, like there can be a misconception of like, oh, it's fully just the client and what their thoughts and ideas are, and like fully focused just on that. Like you might have thoughts, but like write them down and like don't bring them in. And that's definitely not kind of what is authentic and what is actually collaborative and like a back and forth. I think the emphasis tends to be of like making sure that we're couching it in, this is what's coming up for me.
Yeah.
Does this align with anything for you? And if not, let's ignore it and keep going. Like what would be more meaningful for you? How is this very different from what you're experiencing or what you're hoping to express in this moment? And so emphasizing that highly, as well as, allowing that process of ourselves as therapists with the training that we received, like, that perspective could be helpful, but only if it means something to you as the client, and not, it's not a forced thing.
Yeah, for sure. I was just thinking as you were sharing that too. I think another piece, again, if I'm attending to the relationship, attending to how I'm using that, in sessions. I also think it's important to acknowledge that I am human and like there are probably going to be times that I mess up or make a mistake or say something that, doesn't fit for you. And how can we then address that, address the rupture that potentially could occur in the relationship? And then how am I actively participating in repairing that so that then we can continue on, with the work, which I don't know. That wasn't something that I feel like I knew much about when I was in school, and something I think I had to learn a lot more about when I was out on my own. But just like the process, I think, of repair and how important that is when you are misaligned, especially therapist to client, has felt really important to me as well. And helping clients feel like they have an understanding of what that repair process is going to look like, or at least knowing that that is something that feels important to me, to make sure that, again, that sense of safety is always paramount, and like kind of what I'm thinking about more than anything else. So, which I think kind of goes hand in hand with the correcting when I'm wrong. And also like if I am hitting on something that feels really wrong, like how can we move through that together?
What I love about it is that you have the power of language to name it. We've all said that in some respect today, but I do think it is. Like if I can name that, it feels like there was a little bit of a rupture. Here's a little bit of me going public with my feelings in this space. How are you feeling? And even acknowledging, like as you were just saying that, it was like thinking of myself as a client in that if you were to come to me and say like, I feel like we could work on repairing this just a little bit. Something about even you using the words to describe what you're doing or aiming to do with me. Like, okay, now I even have new words to go with this process that maybe going back to the relationship before, I've had limited experience with any other like primary attachment, right? So I think that's part of where there's a lot of meaning being created through the words that we're using, but I also think that it further emphasizes this safety that then this client's like, wow, like now I have words for this experience along with the process of this experience, but not feeling like it's overly prescribed as like, I do it this way. It's just that this is what we're opening up to figure out alongside of each other.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Speaking of having words to name our process, when we say the word rupture, what might that mean to people who are not clinicians?
I mean, I think, how do I want to answer this in the most concise way? I mean, I use the word misalignment too, but I think it's when you're in relationship with somebody and for whatever reason you're not in alignment, whether that's because someone misspoke or what you said was taken out of context, whatever, there's been a break in the sense of safety within that relationship. So I think, a rupture can look like a lot of different things. And the repair process is like, how are we repairing that sense of safety, that sense of trust? And that might look different depending on who we're talking about. And again, everyone's meaning behind safety and trust and like what an adequate repair would look like is going to be different. So I do think it's important, again, for me to be consciously checking in with clients to see like, what does safety mean to you? And how will I know when this isn't there? And what will I need so that it feels like it is repaired or restored? So again, being able to like have, I think, those conversations early and often, and being able to revisit that as needed feels really necessary, in order to continue kind of making sure that that is, like held.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love those questions that you ask, that you emphasize can be continued to ask. That is a continuous conversation that it's great for us to have. Hopefully many clinicians are having continuous conversations along those lines. And I love that explanation. And when I think of rupture, I think of like, it creates an image for me of like a tear. And And so I think I'm maybe thinking like a balloon or something along those lines. And so how do we patch that together? What's our process together to create it, but in a way that for, the client is salient and meaningful and full.
Yeah.
Because again, like kind of going back to like making assumptions, right? Like, something that I tend to say a lot in therapy when I'm trying not to make assumptions is like, I think I know what you mean when you're saying that you're depressed, but what does it mean for you? What does it look like? Because I also have gotten hit with clients being like, I'm depressed. Like, you're a therapist. Don't you know what that means? It's like, I do. And I don't know that I know what it means for you specifically without making assumptions about your process. And so the exact same thing with safety, if not more so. And I can imagine that's really hard for clients to be able to name too, especially if they're coming in with like, I don't even know what safety looks like in my own relationships, let alone this one. Like, I'm trying to figure out what that even means or looks like. So, I mean, that much more reason why it's a very iterative, aka ongoing process and conversation is like we're figuring it out together and figuring out what it looks like in this particular relationship, in this particular space that is more than likely very unique to any other spaces in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I would also say part of why it feels important too is modeling that in this hopefully, safe container so that then the client will be able to transfer that or at least take what they've learned about how to collaboratively create that in this container in their lives, in the real world, if you will. Especially if, again, it's not something that maybe they have felt like they've had practice at or have had positive experiences with in the past. So I think it is also us modeling what safety can look like in their day-to-day life as well. It's not just obviously in the space.
Yeah.
Well, and on the same, I'm trying to think of how to kind of tie that in with this concept of not one is the same. And I remember reading about this or even maybe hearing from Harleen from the collaborative approach. She mentioned something along the lines of like, a lot of people say like that there's this sameness or I feel the same as, or like with depression, for instance. Okay, depression looks the same for everyone can be kind of this assumption that then is made because of the words and how we use them. So it just is like, that's the same for this client, or safety, that's the same for this client as it might be for this client, or considering, backgrounds with this client, that's the same expectation that they have. And bringing this up because I think that was where I experienced a lot of shift in my work of even just replacing the word same with similar. There might be some similarities, but if we go into it with this frame of mind of that's almost like same as like the state of knowing and similar as being like not knowing what else. There might be some similarities, but where are the differences? And that's what I want to hone in on of like the uniqueness of this individual that's in front of me here, or this couple even that's in front of me versus just any of those assumptions of like the same environment is here for you as it will be for the next person. Not at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, I don't know, kind of speaking to like the way in which maybe that shows up for me really is not wanting to kind of take this cookie cutter approach, and like how you are working or how I am working, because I am aware of the fact that even if this client has all of these similarities to another client, the way that I'm working with them will still need to look different because this person is unique. They have their own idiosyncrasies, they have their own lived experience that differs greatly, even if there are these things that feel the same to me, right? So I think also then being able to kind of keep that in my mind, making sure that I'm meeting folks where they're at and tailoring what we're doing to what they're needing, or at least like what they're bringing in, and not assuming that I can kind of just slap the same way of working on to everybody and thinking that we're going to have good results.
Right.
So yeah, I think kind of not assuming that one size fits all.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, another image that's coming to my brain is like thinking of each of us as like these plants that are blooming, that are growing, but we're in our own individual greenhouses, even if some of the ingredients and some of the environmental conditions are very similar to other people's, it's still its own really unique environment, experience, context, if you will, that is very individual to us and what makes us us, that's gone into the soil, that's created how we've grown and how tall we've grown, if you want to go that far. Maybe not so much, but how voluminously we've grown, maybe, whatever. And so it is individual, but there are so many models of therapy that really do try and like kind of slap on the same labels and approaches of like, oh, you have this symptom, let's go in this direction. And that can be helpful to a degree, but we also, I think, a core of collaborative language systems and just a collaborative approach generally is like the healing aspect of just like genuine, authentic human connection and like having a safe space container to experience that in a way in which you feel empowered as the client and you have authentic input from this human who's been trained in doing this in a safe way. And hopefully you feel safe enough as a client to express when that's not the case and empowered enough to advocate for yourself and what your needs are in this space that is for you. Specifically.
I'm like, I don't even know what else I want to add. That was like such a great summary.
You're welcome, guys.
Well, I mean, with that being said, what have we not talked about when it comes to collaborative? I mean, the one thing that kind of popped in my mind, I'm answering my question as I ask it, also naming that I'm doing that as I go. But it does make me think, and as we were talking about this, it opens up perspectives around trauma and treating trauma and potential limitations maybe of collaborative, maybe perhaps very tentative about that. But I bring it up because I do know that there are a lot of modalities that are very specific in treating complex trauma, any type of past traumas. And so it does make me wonder a little bit of like, how can a client then decide what modality or approach is right for them? Or how would we even, in this collaborative space, help them figure that out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there are a few, presenting concerns where I would say it's probably beneficial to work with someone who does have some more specific training, right? So I do think that trauma is one of those areas where I would say having some other things to pull from feels important because I do think that we have learned a lot and there are a lot of really great models, theories that have been done specifically, that have been created, specifically to kind of work with trauma. So I think that being said, the model that I use the most in working with trauma is internal family systems theory, which to me has a lot of the same kind of central tenets of collaborative therapy or like relationship-oriented therapy, where we are not thinking the worst of our clients, like that we are assuming that they do have like the internal resources that they need to make the changes that they want to, healing the trauma that they have experienced in their lives, and really, again, like empowering clients to feel like they can do that work for themselves. So I feel like even in using some of these other models like IFS or somatic experiencing or EMDR, whatever it is, I think you can still do that in a way that is collaborative. Again, knowing that the collaborative nature of therapy to me is less about doing and more about being. So it's like I can still be collaborative and also do some IFS and like do some EMDR. And so I think it can be integrative in that way. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I agree with you. And I remember I had a supervisor from before kind of challenged collaborative at one point. I was like, all of this other training is part of myself of a therapist. It's not like that's all just outside my mind, but that again, it kind of, as we've talked about already today, it's how you bring it in and how you like open it up for the client then to be the expert decider on which route feels most appropriate. It's almost like we kind of just share like, here's some offerings and which one feels most in alignment with you. And if you don't know, because you haven't been given that sense of agent or you haven't had that sense of agency, then how do we help cultivate that by way of just how we're talking about it and engaging them through kind of the power of our questions that are being asked, which is, one of the techniques there of just very open kind of questions of get your own perspective and what other perspectives may be out there that haven't been considered before, kind of what if types of thinking.
Yeah.
I like it.
Great.
Yeah.
So it's not, just to summarize, it's not a standalone. Like, it's not like this is what you're doing. It's like this is part of how you're being in conjunction with whatever else might be helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's the beautiful part of too, like being able to specify the process of therapy to each specific client too. It comes into play of like, okay, it sounds like a combination of collaborative and IFS, for example, or I use a lot of narrative therapy in my work. And so I tend to, combine both of those, but it also depends on what the client's bringing into and what is the best fit for what they're wanting to work on. And that can shift too, depending on if their goals shift, if their most pressing issues shift, it can be very fluid. And that's another beautiful part of it too. Of like, each of us, both as a client and a clinician, are shifting and changing. Our therapy doesn't have to look the same necessarily from session to session either. Yeah. That can also shift and change too. And I think this approach gives a lot of that flexibility as well, which is part of the beauty.
Yeah. Yeah. The fluidity for sure, I feel like is what I just feel like I'm drawn to. I mean, not having to be in a box, not having to be in this one way of operating, and knowing that we can kind of ebb and flow and go where the client needs to go, and also trust that we are going in a direction that is helpful. And also if we need to shift back, we can, and that it isn't fixed. Yeah.
And it's not us coming in thinking, what is our truth that we believe or that we've heard? It's more of how do we help them uncover their own truth in that space? Yeah. Because that's really the guiding principle or the compass. Yeah. I like it. It's good stuff. Collaboration party.
Hope you've uncovered some of your own truth in this conversation.
Yes.
I feel like I have. Shoot.
Well, how do we, if someone wants to work with you, Bri, what would you tell them would be kind of the first steps and how to find you? Or
I would say shooting me an email or a contact form through my website. So brctherapy.com. Sweet. It's currently actually in the works of being updated right now. So it doesn't look how it normally does, but I would say that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Hopefully by the time people are listening to this,
it will be more,
it
will be less in the construction phases, excuse me. But then also can connect with me on Instagram as well. My handle is @therapywithbri. So mental health related content. I haven't been posting on there as much as I want to, but that is a goal of mine this year, is to be more active on there. So those are two ways that they can, that you can find me, that you can get a hold of me.
Awesome.
Set up a session if you want.
Yeah. Beautiful. Great.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Bri. This is an amazing conversation, as we knew it was going to be. We always tend to nerd out together whenever we meet and not recording ourselves. And so I'm glad we got to record one too.
Yeah. Same.
And hopefully we'll get to do some more in the future as well. But so appreciate you and your presence, your efforts, both today and just generally and along the journey too.
I was about to say same. So, similarly, to you. I am really grateful for this time too. And I'm hopeful that when people listen, they'll have some additional perspectives of even just how to have some of those intro conversations of what is your process as a therapist when it comes to feedback, or what's my role in therapy, kind of starting to ask some of those questions if collaborative therapy is the approach you're kind of after, because there are a lot of different modalities out there and it's hard to know where to start, but hopefully our conversation helps offer some pointers. So
Yeah.
all right, y'all.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for being
We'll
here.
see you soon.
Yep.
Okay.
Yay.